In today's plate of history beans, let's talk a bit about the cattle market in the 19th century. Because without the cow, you wouldn't have cowboys and you wouldn't have the Old West. Following the Civil War, folks in Texas found themselves with a dilemma. After the Texans sent Mexican settlers south following the battles of the Alamo and San Jacinto and took over the rolling breaks and mesquite-filled ravines that run from Dallas south all the way into Mexico, it was a while before the country became what it is today. For a while, Comanche raiders were making a lot of that country inhospitable for settlers, and then the Civil War kicked in. As a result, there was a period of time when the longhorn cow, first introduced by Spanish settlers, was able to run free across that broad expanse of territory. By 1865, with the Comanches subdued and the war over, South Texas was teeming with wild longhorn cattle. When I say teeming, I mean teeming. Estimates say that there were as many as 5 million longhorns running around that patch of the woods. Problem was, they weren't worth much. A cow at that time, if you happened to have a patch of land near San Antonio, sold for about $3 to $5. Word was that if a rancher could get his beef to Abilene in Kansas, however, he could sell the same cow for between $30 and $50. Thus, the first cattle drives were born. There was another problem. Longhorns are known to carry ticks and the disease that comes with those nasty little critters. Folks in North Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas didn't want large herds of the animals pouring across their lands, so trails had to be developed. A few trails sprang up, but the most important route by far was the Chisholm Trail. If you want more info, I have an entire plate of history beans about it in a previous episode. Long story short, the trail started in South Texas and ran north through the middle part of Oklahoma, then took a slight turn to the east and ended up in Abilene, Kansas. The boom didn't last long, only about 15 years, from around 1865 to 1880. Railroads were going up all over the place. If one is a fan of the Old West, then that narrow window of time, only 15 years, is the greatest source of inspiration for an entire, uniquely American genre of entertainment, the Western. Imagine a world without movies like Rio Bravo or Red River, or TV shows like Lonesome Dove or Yellowstone and all its spin-offs. Simply put, without cattle and cattle drives, there would be a lot less Old West to talk about. Hunting Charm, Chapter 14, A Mad Bull.
I can't believe you shot me.
Bart had complained about his wound no fewer than 15 times in the past hour. Bucky, feeling simultaneously guilty and annoyed, tried to change the subject.
Dang hot weather,
he said.
We ain't gonna get to that creek before dark,
Bart grumbled.
I'm hungry. This bullet in my arm's got me worn out. I need food. It ain't more than a mile to them trees. Then we can settle in and rest for a day. I wish to hell you'd listen to me once in a while. What? Why do you have to get to that creek? We could camp right here and get over there in the morning. You act like there's something we can't live without them dang trees. Plus you ain't shot. I can't believe you shot me. If I hadn't shot you, then the wagon would have run over the other mule and we'd be carrying the supplies. If you hadn't shot me, I could carry half of what the mule's carrying.
Bart kicked sullenly at a clump of sod.
Why didn't you just tell me to stop?
Bucky didn't bother reminding his brother that he had told him to stop.
I just said I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. Yeah, but you shot me. I was aiming to shoot the knife out of your hand. You ain't no gunslinger. I would have hit the knife, but you moved. People move, Bucky. That's what people do. They move now and then. Just stop. You think I don't feel bad about this deal? I'm lucky you didn't shoot me in the gut. I'm tired, brother. I can't walk no more.
Bucky looked at his brother, then at the line of trees still a mile away. Bart was right. They wouldn't be able to reach the creek before dark.
Okay, let's get over yonder by that hackberry. I got dibs on the sack of beans for my pillow.
Bart pulled the bag from the mule, embracing it with his good arm.
Just let me get a couple of handfuls for dinner. I'm sick of these damn beans. Wish we was back in Abilene where we could get a steak. Maybe we could hunt up a jackrabbit. I heard Rattler makes a mighty good stew. We could mix the snake meat in with the beans. We ain't got no rabbit nor a rattler, so don't get yourself worked up. I ain't even sure I want to cook beans tonight. I'm wore out.
Bucky knew his brother wouldn't react well to the notion of going hungry, but they had been walking for over a mile, more than either of them had walked in one stretch in years.
You ain't fixin' beans? It's nearly dark already. We ain't got no firewood. Oh, brother, I'm wasting away. Bart, no, it's all right. Just give me a handful. I'll suck on a few. You can't eat uncooked beans, brother. I wasn't planning on eating them. I just want to hold a few in my mouth. Dang it, you'll swallow the things whole. Hell, I'll just make a pot. Can you help find some sticks or buffalo chips for the fire? Brother, my arm has me all dizzy like. Jesus Christ, on a thorny mesquite.
Bucky pulled himself up and after gathering a few dried buffalo patties, got a fire started. The beans took nearly 2 hours, enough time for the stars to come out. Bart began snoring. For a moment, Bucky felt he should just let his brother rest. Then he decided against it. If Bart awoke hungry in the night, it would mean more arguing.
Supper is ready.
He gave Bart a nudge. Bart, disoriented from his nap, instinctively raised both arms to stretch, then, reminded of his wound, let out a yelp.
I can't move my arm none, and my hand's gone numb, he said. I done said I'm sorry 20 times, brother. I heard when the man gets shot in the arm, he might just as well cut the thing off lest it gets all rotted up. You think I'm going to need to cut my arm off? I don't know, brother. Feels all broken up and blood oozing out. If we need to cut it off, you're going to have to do it. I can't hardly feel my hand. You done said that and I ain't cutting off your arm.
Bucky and Bart Baylor sat side by side against the hackberry tree, shoveling beans into their mouths. Neither man took note of the gentle sigh of the breeze, the mist of stars that filled the night skies, or the dot of light shining from the Johnson farmhouse less than a mile away. As they finished their meal, Bart complained a final time about the errant gunshot and the lack of bacon, before both men turned in for a restless night under the stars. The next morning, as they staggered to their feet, Bucky couldn't help but notice his brother's bloodshot eyes.
Maybe we should just hit on back directly, without a day of rest like I planned, he said.
Bucky had been considering Bart's comment about losing the arm. The notion that they were now on foot had weighed heavily on his mind throughout the night. Without the wagon or anything left to barter with, they might not have the means to get home. They could die trying to walk all the way to Abilene.
"I need a day," Bart said. "I can't go no more." "Okay, you're right,"
Bucky said. He had also been contemplating the question of how to explain the missing wagon. If they did make it back, he couldn't simply tell the truth. What would people say when he talked about how the Comanche had taken one of their mule teams? How would he explain the loss of the third mule and his brother's gunshot wound? On top of everything, what would they say about Doreen? What if she had already turned up back in Abilene? What if she hadn't? Bucky realized he would need to invent 2 or 3 sets of lies. The entire business was getting too complicated to sort. They trudged on across the prairie, Bart moaning pitifully with every step. Shortly before noon they arrived at the line of trees. A decent-sized stream trickled between the cottonwood and oaks. Both men waded in, cooling off.
"That feels good."
Bart eased himself into the gentle current, splashing his face and shoulders and rinsing his wound.
"How's the arm?" "Hurts like fire. Nothing to ask. I was just trying to be brotherly." "The brotherly thing would have been not to shoot me in the first place."
They continued bathing in silence. They were both accustomed to hard work, but had never experienced the rigors of the open trail. Both men had lost weight, and both felt weight loss signaled a decrease in their vitality. Bart especially prided himself upon his enormous girth. At work he had often boasted that he could throw a full-grown bull. Though he had never made good on his bold statement, he had regularly used his girth to shove a stubborn cow up a ramp or into a corral. Now, rinsing his wound, Bart realized he would never enjoy such strength again. Attempts to move his right hand resulted in excruciating pain, a sign that essential elements of his arm were damaged. In addition, he felt Bucky lacked the proper degree of sympathy. At one point, Bart considered pulling his pistol to give his brother a taste of his own medicine. He realized, however, that such an action would not heal his wound and that he might accidentally kill his brother. Despite everything, he wasn't ready to go that far. While Bucky gathered sticks and buffalo chips for a fire, Bart dozed on a patch of sand beneath a tremendous red oak. Bucky, examining his brother, saw that Bart had a pale bluish skin tone and blood continued to ooze from the gunshot wound. It angered him that Bart had steadfastly refused to allow him to wrap the wound. Bucky knew that most folks regarded him as the smarter of the twins. At work, Claude Hallam always addressed him with their daily assignments. The situation hadn't gone unnoticed.
"Folks don't ever talk to me,"
Bart had said on one occasion.
"They always speaks to you, and I'm just standing there like a fool."
Even their father placed important decisions regarding the farm into Bucky's hands. Though they had been born only minutes apart, Bucky had always been treated like the older brother. When they asked their mother which had come first, she said, "Weren't more than 10 seconds between the two of you. Damn near killed me." Sadly, their mother had died 3 weeks after their 13th birthday, stricken with fever during the blistering heat of late August. Bucky wondered what she might think about their current lives. Neither of them had married. Indeed, even the whores in town seemed to dislike them. His daddy had grown so large he seldom moved from the front porch, where he sat whittling animal figurines from bits of pine. The old man had sold one small section after another of their land to pay the bills over the past 10 years. His mother would be shocked by the decline in the Baylor family fortunes. Bucky had little more than a hazy remembrance of the months following his mother's death. He did recall that at her graveside service his father announced that despite his wife's passing, there would be a Christmas party at the ranch as usual. During those months, his father had seemed determined to carry on as normal, though in retrospect Bucky realized the loss of his mother had crippled them all. In years past, the Baylor Christmas celebration had been a grand event, regarded as one of the highlights on the Abilene social calendar. The Baylor family had been one of the first families to settle there, years before the town itself was founded. Bucky's grandfather, Breland, had built a tremendous farm that encompassed nearly 1,000 acres of tilled land and a full section of wooded lowland filled with bur oak and black walnut. So the announcement about the Christmas party had been widely lauded, though many wondered privately if Beaufort Baylor had the wherewithal to pull things off without his wife. As for Bucky's apple-cheeked mother, Millie, she had been well loved for her baked goods and generous spirit. If anyone fell ill, Millie was there within a day or two with a loaf of bread or cinnamon rolls. Some suggested that the illness that killed her had been contracted when she delivered a loaf of her famous roseberry and basil bread to an elderly man who died of scarlet fever 2 weeks before Millie's passing. The November following their mother's death, as they prepared for the party, Beaufort did his best to pretend that all was well. The evening of the event, with the help of his neighbors and friends, the usual dishes were laid upon tables. Guests in festive holiday attire feasted on plates of barbecued beef, corn on the cob, beans sweetened with molasses, and pickled cabbage. Many of the guests commented that Millie's dinner rolls were sorely missed. Nevertheless, reviews for Beaufort's effort were effusively positive. That evening, musicians strummed, plucked, and fiddled, setting a festive tone as the sun edged to the horizon and the skyline glowed red. As night fell, blazing bonfires took the edge off the December chill, while guests danced, played dominoes, cards, horseshoes, and croquet. As night fell, lanterns were hung, and the women replaced the dinner fare with pies, cakes, cookies, and a steaming cauldron of hot, spiced tea. For Bucky, the evening felt surreal. The festivities reminded him of his mother, especially when the time came for the tradition she had cherished most. Each year, with dessert, there was a gift exchange. Guests were asked to bring a child's toy to the party. Boys' gifts wrapped with blue bows, girls with pink or red. The women in town took care to wrap their boxes well, and that year, as in previous years, the pile of gifts beneath the red cedar in the Baylor's front yard stood nearly 4 feet high. The name of every child was written on a slip of paper, and then Santa appeared. In the past, Beaufort Baylor had portrayed St. Nick wearing a red suit, a fake beard made of bleached wood, and an odd homemade mask that never failed to terrify the smaller children. On this occasion, however, because of the tragic circumstances surrounding Millie's death, another local volunteer had taken on the role. As always, as Santa began distributing packages, there was a great deal of cheering as each child opened his or her gift. Bucky spent a long moment trying to remember what he had received that evening, but couldn't. Then it happened, an event that changed their lives inexorably from that day forward. There was periodic applause as each child shredded wrapping paper to reveal a doll or a wooden pistol. Then suddenly everything stopped. Young Gretty Growtower, weeping, blood dripping from her nose, with a torn dress and one breast exposed, had stumbled into their midst. Bucky hadn't understood what was happening at that moment. Indeed, he would not understand fully for 3 or 4 years. He only recalled young Hetty babbling hysterically and pointing toward the barn. Then his father had stumbled out, reeling like a mad bull, blood dripping from a wound on his forehead. The party ended quickly after that, guests slipping away like ghosts. After that night, his father seemed to collapse. The once vital Beaufort Baylor, a man noted for his sense of humor and kind spirit, stopped going into town, neglected the farm, and instead spent his days whittling in morose silence. Later, after they began working at the stockyard and started eating their meals at the local hotel, they rarely saw their father, even though he remained there at the farm. On occasions when they did visit, they hardly spoke. In the years since that night, no one in town, as far as Bucky could recall, ever asked about or mentioned his father. It was as if the once proud Baylor family had ceased to exist. Bucky pieced together details about that night later in his mind. After his father convinced young Hetty to accompany him to the barn and sexually assaulted her, she used a pair of fencing dikes to rebuff Beaufort's advances. Bucky knew Hetty had used the heavy pliers because he recalled picking them up from the floor of the barn the day following the Christmas party. There had also been a blood-stained pair of women's bloomers. Later still, Bucky would realize that innocent Hetty must have been a virgin. Over the years, Bucky had formed other opinions about those times. For example, he came to blame his father for his mother's death, though he couldn't say why. He also felt God had stripped his father of his vitality because of his rape of Hetty Growtower, a conclusion that had some element of truth in it, though probably not due to divine reconciliation. Having lost both parents, his mother to scarlet fever and his father to Millie's death, Bucky changed too. While both twin boys remained fun-loving at times, Bucky experienced moments of rage. There were fistfights at school. On one occasion, an older classmate challenged Bucky over a point in a game of horseshoes. Bucky started screaming, then threw the boy to the ground, pummeling him into a state of unconsciousness. There had been other encounters with fellow students. Bart, who generally followed his brother's lead, usually joined in the fights, and the pair became known as notorious bullies. One afternoon, the teacher asked them to remain after class. Bucky could still recall how the teacher scolded them, then told them they were no longer welcome at school. Up until that moment, Bucky had hated school. They went to work at the stockyards 3 months later, shortly after their 15th birthday. Thinking about the past and their current situation, Bucky felt his anger rise. Any experienced cattle handler, particularly one working in a stockyard, will tell you that sometimes a bull or cow, frightened by unfamiliar surroundings, will run mad. Spooked animals, bulls especially, will charge about, bashing into the corral beams, sending cowhands scrambling for the fences. In a like manner, there by the sandy creek, Bucky grew infuriated. His tirade started slowly. Feeling the need to break something, he tugged at a limb until he separated the enormous branch from the tree. Then, like a raging Damocles, he began swinging the thing, shattering it against rocks and other trees, thrashing around until the thick branch was reduced to splinters and his chest felt like it might explode. When the tirade ended, he hurled the remains of the branch into the creek, then collapsed onto a log, wheezing from exertion. He spent the next 5 minutes regaining his breath. If you had asked Bucky later why he got so angry, he would not have been able to say exactly. The deeper truth was that along with his worries about the situation, Bucky had been hoping to find Cecil Johnson. From the time they first learned that Doreen had possibly left with a colored man, the notion had bothered him. Why would a woman as pretty as Doreen leave in such a way? Was it possible she had gone voluntarily? Was it possible that Doreen, who was known to be lusty in her ways, had an attraction for a colored man? The notion infuriated him every time it crossed his mind. As Bucky sat there, he recalled a previous time when he had dealt with a colored man. It had happened in late May, 2 years earlier. One of the hands at the stockyard, an elderly colored fellow, had paused at Bucky's direct order to open a gate. "Boss man done told us how we ain't to have both gates open at once. Let me just get this other gate closed so's we don't mix these two bunches." Something about the man's tone had enraged Bucky that afternoon. Roaring obscenities, he told the elderly gentleman that he had been about to close his gate. The unfortunate soul who stood there listening, head bowed, didn't lift a finger as Bucky threw him to the ground. Instead, he scuttled away like a pen rider, scrambling to get atop the fences to avoid a raging bull. The old fellow might have escaped that afternoon, except as he scaled the fence, his foot slipped and he tumbled awkwardly back onto the manure-dotted ground. Something about the man's awkward fall, his helplessness, enraged Bucky further, and despite cries for mercy, he lifted the man and slammed him against the oak-railed corral beams again and again until the poor fellow went limp in his arms. There were no consequences for the brutal murder of William Cotton. Bucky wasn't even asked to apologize to the man's wife. The sheriff at the time, an old friend of his father's, agreed the colored penwriter's death was an unfortunate accident. "We'll just say he fell and got trampled by a mad cow," the sheriff had said. As Bucky sat there on the log, his breath returning to normal, he decided he would spend one more day searching for Cecil Johnson. Based upon the word of a stranger they had questioned 2 days earlier, Bucky suspected they must be getting close to the Johnson place. The man said to look for a pair of low-lying hills that resembled a pair of titties. He said if you came to the Shawnee Trail, you had gone too far. Bucky hadn't seen any sign of the Shawnee Trail. He might not have recognized the dirt trail if he had, but to the south a pair of rounded hills that resembled a pair of breasts had appeared. Despite his brother's injury and the need for a prompt return to Abilene, Bucky wanted closure. No colored man should consort with a white woman. It didn't matter if Doreen had left voluntarily with the mule farmer. It didn't matter if Cecil Johnson had no idea what had happened to Doreen. If Bucky found Johnson, he would have revenge, if for nothing but the trouble they had faced on their journey. With that thought in mind, Bucky's anger surged a second time. He pulled at another branch, this one dead and ready to fall. He barely managed to dodge the limb as it crashed to the ground. It was at that moment, as he stumbled back, that he saw something in the distance. He squinted, not quite sure of what he was seeing at first. Was it an animal? Then it became clear to him, and Bucky smiled. In fact, he felt suddenly lighter than air. He wasn't seeing a deer or a cow. What he saw, partially hidden by the trees, was a person. The person was unaware of Bucky's presence, bathing, perhaps, or simply enjoying a cool dip on a hot afternoon. Bucky couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, an adult or a child. He was able to identify only one detail. The person, whoever they were, whatever they were doing, was black.